Welcome everybody to the Chess Lab. This is how to reassess your chess. We are reading through Silman book. This is part 2 of the series. So let's go. Well, this is another Silman book. Now we read through the introduction and we are reading through part 1, the concept of imbalances. So I'm gonna read this again very quickly. I'm not gonna affirm myself on it too much, but I'm gonna read it because it's huge. A sound plan makes us all heroes. The absence of a plan, idiots. Grandmaster Kotov quoting a mysterious chess sage. So, again, this introduction, I already read it, but it's so important, so huge. I'm just gonna read it again. Okay, let's go. At some time or another, every tournament player learns a few opening lines, some tactical ideas, the most basic mating patterns, and a few elementary endgames. As he gets better and more experienced, he significantly adds to this knowledge. However, the one thing that just about everybody has problems with is planning. From class E, under 1200, to master, I get blank stares when asking what plan they had in mind in a particular position. Usually, their choice of a plan, if they have any plan at all, is based on emotional rather than chess-specific considerations. By emotional, I mean that the typical player does what he feels like doing rather than what the board is telling him to do. This somewhat cryptic sentence leads us to the following extremely important concept. I'm gonna highlight this. If you want to be successful, you have to base your moves and plans on the specific imbalance-oriented criteria that exist in the given position, not on your mood, tastes, and/or fears. Crucial. Literally every non-masters games are filled with examples of imbalance avoidance. Beginners, of course, simply don't know what imbalances are. Most experienced players have heard the term and perhaps have even tried to make use of them from time to time. However, once the rush of battle takes over, isolated moves and raw aggression, or terror if you find yourself defending, push any and all thoughts of imbalances out the door. In this case, chess becomes an empty move-by-move, threat-by-threat, either making them or responding to them affair. What is this mysterious allusion? What is this mysterious allusion to the chessboard's desires? That is, doing what the chessboard wants you to do. What is this imbalanced-oriented criteria that we are going to have to become aware of, and how do we master its use? What exactly is a plan? To answer these questions, the first thing we have to do is understand that an imbalance is any significant difference in the two respective positions. This sounds rather vacuous. How can such a simplistic thing be important? The answer is that it's far from simplistic and that this easy-to-grasp concept allows any player from 1400 on up to understand most positions in a basic but logical fashion. In other words, where a position may have looked much too complex to fathom, the imbalance is deconstructed in a way that makes it user-friendly. Here is a simple example. If one side has more queenside space while the other side is staring at his opponent's weak pawn, those are the imbalances that delineate the moves and plans that both players will follow. In effect, the imbalances act as a roadmap that shows each side what to do. The following list of the imbalances will be discussed all through this book. And this is very important because this chapter, which is true that it's called part 1, but is an introduction to the whole thing. In this chapter, every line basically is about one of these concepts. So, superior minor piece, pawn structure, space, material, control of a key file, control of a whole or a weak square, a lead in development, initiative, though I'll usually refer to it as pushing your own agenda, king safety, and statics versus dynamics. Whole sections are devoted to each imbalance and whole sections are devoted to each imbalance on this list, but first let's take a quick, at times exaggerated, look at all of them. My immediate goal is to give you a feel for what imbalances are. My ultimate goal is to train your mind to embrace imbalance consciousness. a state where the use of imbalances becomes a natural and often unconscious process. In a nutshell, an imbalance is any significant difference in the two respective positions. Okay, we already saw this line, so let's keep moving. So, superior minor piece is the first imbalance, right? And we are talking about bishop versus knight in this line here. So let's read it. So, let's look at this position. Let's just do some very objective considerations. 3 pawns, 3 pawns, 6 pawns, 6 pawns, 1 minor piece. Okay, so material is equal. However, we notice one imbalance, which is white as a bishop, black as a knight. So let's read the Grandmaster comment. Compare white's bishop, which is eyeing two position penetrating diagonals, and black's slacker knight. And you'll immediately know which minor piece is winning this battle. Okay, so let's compare it. The bishop is again looking at these two important diagonals, putting some pressure on the a7 pawn, right? But also this dark square diagonal, which is key. You can imagine moves like bishop c3, queen d4 to threaten mate. And this knight, well, cannot move forward. And if it goes to h6, can be easily blocked by h3, right? And even if it reaches g4, it's like very nicely controlled by the bishop. So let's read the Grandmaster comment. When we add other imbalances into the equation, white has an advantage in both central and queenside space. We control these e6, d7 and b7 squares, whereas black controls very little, if at all. A target on a7, which can be gobbled up by rook from a1 to b1 to b7, okay, winning a7, noticing how the a6 pawn is defended by our queen, and chances to mate after bishop c3 followed by queen d4, okay. Black's vulnerable king, one could understand, yeah, this was linked, and chances to mate black's vulnerable king, one could understand if black chose this moment to resign. Okay, so that was an example of the bishop being better than the knight, and that's an imbalance. Now let's look again at superior minor piece against knights. This is another line. Wait a minute, because I clicked on the same line. This, okay. So this is a very similar position. Material is equal, but we have a knight and they have a bishop, so that's an imbalance. So let's look at this. Black's bishop, which is caged and useless, is no match for white's knight, which is the ruler of the known universe. Combined with other favorable white imbalances, central, queenside and kingside space, control of the whole on e6, and after rook from a1 to b1 to b7, pressure against a7 and c7, black would be well advised to resign as quickly as possible. So as you can see, there are other imbalances, right? It's not just the knight and the bishop or the bishop on the knight like the previous example, it's also space advantage, control of key squares, and the ability to attack weaknesses. So if you're not familiar with these concepts, don't worry. I'm not familiar with those concepts either. It's all about getting used to them, so don't worry too much about it. Okay, so now the first imbalance is difference in minor pieces. Now let's look at this position here, and here we're talking about pawn structure, and we're talking about weak pawns and passed pawns. So, you know, a passed pawn is an imbalance. If you have a passed pawn and your opponent doesn't have a passed pawn, that's a big imbalance. And if your opponent has weak pawns and you don't have weak pawns, that's also an imbalance, right? And again, an imbalance, I don't remember the exact definition, but it's basically a difference in the two players' position. And it's a roadmap for the way of playing. So let's look at this position. Let's evaluate. So 2-3, 1-3. So black's up a pawn, the rest is equal. However, we have a passed pawn on b6, which is quite further advanced, like 2 moves and it promotes. And also black has passed pawns, one on a6 and one on d4. However, they are less advanced, right? The a6 pawn is really less advanced, whereas the The d4 pawn is just one square below, but is of course important. And also the promotion square is very good, very well controlled by us, whereas the promotion square is not really well controlled by black. So it feels like our b6 pawn is a stronger asset, but again, feels like it's not a good phrasing. So let's see what the Grandmaster says. So black is up a pawn, and he has 2 passed pawns, 2 whites, 1 passer. Yeah. Yet black can resign. The reason? White's passed pawn is further advanced, and all these pieces are working with the pawn to make sure it scores a touchdown on b8. And so yeah, it seems like that's the right evaluation. So b7, someone said passed pawn must be pushed, threatening to win a whole rook with b8 equals queen. Yeah, because if you promote, they take, you take, and that's a whole rook. If they take back, you take back. Rook b8, but simply bishop takes b8. Rook takes b8, and now after the forced sequence, we can evaluate the position again. You know, black is up a pawn, but white is up an exchange. Also, white has a passed pawn, which is almost queening, so super strong. Black has 2 passed pawns, but they are considerably further away. So we can actually conclude, and this is getting me excited, I almost want to smile, but we can conclude that white's advantage increased. Because if you compare this position and the evaluation we just made with the previous position, this evaluation states that this is even better for white, right? That's crazy. And if you check the engine, it's probably the same. Bro, I feel so amazing. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. I feel like this evaluating position is working a little bit. So anyways, queen c6. Of course, it gets tactical, right? Queen c6, threatening the queen. And if they take our queen, then we're threatening rook c8. And so they play queen d8, trying to hang on. No better is queen takes c6, rook takes c6, again threatening rook c8 check. And after bishop e5, rook c8 check anyways. And after king to g7, we can take, this is all forced, and now rook to a1. Rook to a1 basically threatens rook takes a6, rook a8. And after d3, trying to distract the rook, there's simply king f3. And there's no way to prevent white king from approaching the pawn, like if d2, king e2. Let's read the comment. Stopping and any d pawn nonsense and intending rook takes a6 followed by rook a8. Yeah. So queen d8 instead of taking, which leads to a simplified winning ending for white. Queen c8, because of course if you capture with a rook, we just promote and we win your queen. Bishop e5, trying to defend the rook, but now queen takes, rook takes, and now rook c8, and it's over. Because if you take our rook, first of all, we are attacking the rook. If you take us, we promote. If you don't take us, we promote, right? Or actually, no, I take and then I promote, and I'm a full rook, so that's over. So in this position, we can just push, win an exchange, and then it gets tactical. We play queen c6, very simple, and we just win. So smooth. Okay. Now let's look again at pawn structure, the weak pawns and the passed pawn, and let's look at this position. So this feels like a little bit more complex position, so I'm going to evaluate it again. 6 pawns, 6 pawns. Okay, so it feels like this is material is equal. Let's try to look at the imbalances. Let's look at pawn structure again, weak pawns, passed pawns. Are there any passed pawns in this position? Actually, there are not, believe it or not, but there is a weak pawn, the pawn on e6. And so our plan is to try to attack this pawn as much as possible and perhaps preventing it to be pushed to simplify the position. So let's read the Grandmaster comment. I know Silman is not a Grandmaster, but I'm going to call him a Grandmaster. He has the honorary title for how many players he helped and also his understanding of chess and his ability to teach it to others. So he's a Grandmaster in my mind. So black has a weak, isolated pawn on e6. Naturally, white dedicated his game plan to going after it. Okay, obviously. Thus far, white's queen and rooks are piling on the pressure, but since chess is a team game, he's not done yet. So correctly, we evaluated that this is the weakness, and we have to try to target it. Bishop h3. A fourth white piece enters the assault against e6, and it also pins e6 to the queen, meaning any attempt to pushing it is futile. So knight d8, adding a defender, and now knight g5, adding an attacker. The entrance of this fifth white piece into the battle for e6 dooms black's pawn. And here bishop to b8 was tried. This allows a trick that makes black game even worse, because by playing bishop to b8 you are undefending the rook on e7, meaning this rook on e7 is actually hanging, so this pawn cannot move, so f5. And if you take, you just lose a full rook. G takes f5, taking with the other pawn again, we said is losing, and now bishop takes f5, which again is untouchable, but this is now terrible for black. And e6 will still fall, but now black's king is sitting in open air, another imbalance white can use. Very interesting. So let's assume was white to play knight takes, bishop takes with check, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes. Yeah, and we win the game. Okay. So let's do this. So we identify the weakness, so bishop h3 to attack it, and we attack it again, and now we can play this move, which is tactically working. Okay. So we went through the imbalances as general considerations, and then we talked about superior minor piece as a concept. Sometimes it's the bishop, sometimes it's the knight, and then we looked at pawn structure. We saw an example of a passed pawn, and how we can exploit it to get an advantage and to win. And then we looked at a weak pawn, which made our opponent's position collapse. So we talked about superior minor piece and pawn structure. Now we talk about space, the annexation of territory. That's the name of this line. So let's see. Okay, so let's evaluate this position. 8 pawns, all the minor pieces. So material is equal. What can we notice? Are there any passed pawns? Not really. But if we look at the position, there is of course one main characteristic, which is we have more space, right? Because our furthest push pawns are on our 5th rank, whereas they only have one pawn on their 4th rank, which is the pawn on e5. And we have more space. We control squares like e6, g6. On our 6th rank, they control at best 2 squares on their 5th rank, right? Which is d4 and f4. But this is not comparable. And this forces their pieces to be quite passive. If you look at their knight, they have no moves. If you look at their bishops, they have no moves. The rook has no moves. The queen can just randomly move. The rook, same thing. The rook actually cannot move because we would just grab a pawn, which perhaps we don't even want to grab because after b6 they have counterplay, right? But it's just a terrible position for them. It seems like. But let's see the Grandmaster comment here. A nightmare for black, who is so cramped that he's gasping for air. White has claimed an appreciable advantage in space in virtually every sector. Note how black's lack of wiggle room leaves his pieces in a tight little box, while white's are happy free-range pieces. In such positions, the side with this much extra space will almost certainly win if he can find a way to break into enemy territory. So this is very important. Here white, who enjoys a wealth of riches, can accomplish this by preparing a queenside entry via c4, c5, so this pawn thrust here, or a kingside slaughter via g4, g5, so pawn breaks. Both pawn advances dare to demand even more space. Thus, logical moves would be c5, okay, or g5, okay, or rook c to g1, which prepares g5, or rook to h1, which also prepares g5 in the form of controlling more squares on the king side. So that's very interesting. So if you have more space, I would say the conclusion is try to look for pawn breaks. Okay. So we talked about the stronger minor piece. We talked about pawn structure, and we talked about space advantage. Now let's talk about material. Material, the philosophy of greed. So let's look at this position here, 3-3, 3-3. Okay, so material is equal. If we look at the pawn structure, there is a pawn majority for black on the queen side and a pawn majority for white on the king side. When it comes to space, it's pretty much equal. When it comes to piece activity, it's perhaps also equal. maybe our light square bishop is a little bit better than their dark square bishop, but because their dark square bishop is biting on concrete. Okay, but of course it's our move, and there is a pawn to b7 to be taken, so we can capture b7, right? White is solid, but black seems to have a nice active position. If black's c-pawn was on c6, he wouldn't have any problems at all, but it's still on c7, and that gives white the chance to embrace his inner greed and claim a material imbalance. Bishop takes b7. Taking this pawn does a number of useful things. It gives white endgame odds. This thing here, guys, especially since we are also studying Silman endgame book, is absolutely huge. This is huge. So let's reread this. Taking this pawn does a number of useful things. It gives white endgame odds, which means you know, if we ever enter an endgame, white of course has the edge. So it gives white endgame odds. Annoying for black, since the more pieces the materially challenged side trades, the closer to a pawn-up endgame victory white goes. It creates a all on c6, which allows white to grab control of the central light squares along the h1, a8 diagonal. It places great psychological pressure on black, who now has to get something going in an effort to justify the lost pawn. And I would add, it also destroys black pawn structure that now has a weakness on a7 and the 3-pawn island in general, right? So what black did was king to h8. Black would love to take advantage of the errant white bishop, but nothing works. And now white is very much on top after both bishop g2 and queen to c4, making new light square inroads. If instead of king h8, black tried c6 to trap this bishop, unfortunately queen c4, unfortunately for them, queen c4 just picks up another pawn. So if instead they tried bishop to g4, which tries to, you know, win some material here, again queen c4 check, and it's pretty tough. f3 in this position also would work. The bishop would have to go back. It's not clear where. But okay, queen c4, king h8, and now bishop to c6, which attacks the queen. You can also consider in this position rook to d4, interesting, which attacks the bishop, and if they take, I guess they have massive issues on the dark squares, but okay, bishop c6 attacking the queen, queen to f5, and here rook to d2, simply defending f2 and moving away from the attack of the bishop. We are still up a pawn and the position continues. The idea is f2, f4 when black doesn't have enough compensation for the lost pawn. Okay. However, after we take, they go king to h8, but now simply bishop back to g2, keeping it simple. A reset that can be played if white suddenly freaks out a bit and decides that his bishop is too far from home. Fair enough. So to recap this, of course, we just take the pawn and we just go back. Very nice. Okay. So we talked about the superior minor piece, we talked about the pawn structure, we talked about the space, and we talked about the material. Now we want to talk about control of a key file, roads for rooks. This is very important. When I evaluate positions, I usually don't take into account open files. I just don't, which is very interesting, and quite frankly, it's quite ridiculous that I don't take into account these things. So let me clean my nose. That's the logical conclusion. Okay, so let's evaluate this position. Material 4, 3, 4, 3, 7 pawns each. Okay, material is equal. Let's look at imbalances. Material, we said comparing minor pieces. The dark square bishop is not terrible. He's putting pressure on d4. The white light square bishop perhaps can be improved, right? But he's not terrible either. They're opposite color bishop. They're kind of equal in general, but okay. However, there's a difference, which is space. We have more space on the queen side and slight more space on the king side and the center, I would say. But definitely on the queen side. And let's now look at material, again, we cannot grab material. Now, control of a key file. Of course, there is one open file in this position, which is the E file, and we are controlling it. And so this is a big imbalance. And so we said we have more space on the queen side, the bishop can be improved, we have an imbalance here. Black would love to play rook e8 to trade the heavy pieces and equalize us easily. So, you know, if we combine everything, bishop c6, as you can see, is the move. Is just a very good move. But let's read what the Grandmaster says. White is doubled on the E file, important since it's the only open file on the board. He has more central and queenside space, and his bishop is the master of the light squares along the h1-a8 diagonal. Nevertheless, a lot of material has already been exchanged, and the presence of bishop of opposite colors leads one to believe that black will be able to hold on. On top of all that, black intends to swap rooks along the e file with rook d to e8. So our evaluation was pretty accurate, I will say. I have to be honest and say, but I already said it in the previous video, I already went through this chapter here. I'm just redoing it because I did it off camera, and I want you guys to also be a part of this journey. But, so I already saw this position, you know, I just wanted to be honest. Bishop c6. Fortunately for white, there is no need to worry since he has bishop c6 with the idea of, well, taking control of the e file, I would say, not allowing rook e8. Okay, queen to g4, and here rook to e4, permanently laying claim to the e file. Now, black has no active plan, and he can only sit back and passively wait, hoping that white won't be able to figure out a way to break through. And remember, when you have the space advantage and all that, you should try to find perhaps pawn breaks. In the position after bishop c6, both sides are playing for two possible results. Black will either lose or draw, and white will either win or draw. Obviously, nobody will want to be in black's shoes, of course. So that was pretty self-explanatory. So we play bishop c6, the queen tries to be active, no thank you. Of course, that was attacking the d4 pawn, which is a weakness we have identified too in the evaluation. Okay, so we talked about all these concepts, right? I'm gonna reread them because yes, the superior minor piece, the pawn structure, space, material, and control of a key file. Now we're gonna talk about control of a whole or a weak squares, homes for horses. So let's see this. Okay, so let's look at this position. Let's try to evaluate. So 3, 4, 4, 3, so 7 pawns, and material is equal. So let's look at compare the minor pieces. We have a knight, they have a bishop. Their bishop is terrible. If we are able to improve our knight, that would be great imbalance. There is one semi-open file, which is the D file, and also a semi-open file, which is the E file. One for white, the D file, and one for black, the E file. And let's look about material. Can we grab any material? It feels like we can't. The opponent can't. Let's look at other imbalances. The space. White has much more space on the queen side, the center, and also the king side. So we have more space everywhere. So we have a potential better minor piece and also much better space. This makes all of our pieces also better by default. And our plan is now to improve the position of our knight to really make it dominate, and also eventually figure out a way to break through with the pawn breaks. So a plan that comes to mind is to play something like knight to d3 and then knight to f4 to go to those light squares, right? I don't know if there is a difference, knight e2 or knight to d3, but the goal is to get to f4 to go to the light squares. And then perhaps to e6 specifically, so that the pawn break g5 will be possible. But let's see what the Grandmaster says. White enjoys extra space all over the board, but this battle is clearly about the minor pieces. Both have fallen on hard times. Black's bishop is living in the dirt with no hope of improving its lot, while White's knight dreams of a better home than the hovel on c1. However, unlike the poor bishop, the knight doesn't have to stay in the gutter. Two squares, the mansion on d5 and the mega mansion on c6, sorry, on e6, beacon, and all, I think I mispronounced that, beacon, I don't know, and all White has to do, beacon, I don't know if I mispronounced that, and all White has to do is figure out how to get his horse there. Once you know your destination goal, it's easy to find the path to it. Indeed, knight d3 is correct, followed by knight f4 and knight e6. Once the knight reaches its dream square, a well-timed g4, g5 advance will finish black off. And knight e2 is also good. Okay, so that was also good. Okay, so we talked about, again, I'm gonna go over them every time. We talked about the superior minor piece, we talked about the pawn structure, we talked about space, material, and then we talked about control of a key file, control of a hole, or a weak square. Now we're going to talk about lead in development. You are outnumbered. Wow, that's scary. So, a lead in development is a very dangerous thing, and the developmentally challenged side should do his best to keep things closed until his king gets safely castled and his other pieces find their way into the fray, thereby catching up in development and allowing a fight of equal armies. Opening gambits are based on creating the imbalance of material versus development. So that's another imbalance. And they can give the attacker some quick wins if the opponent foolishly allows the position to open up. Okay, let's keep going. So e4, c5, Sicilian. d4, this is the, well, it's not clear yet, because after c takes d4 they can do whatever they want to do. c3, okay, that should be the Smith-Morra. d takes, knight takes. So white here sacrificed the pawn, but he's trying to get a lead in development. Knight to c6, knight to f3, d6, bishop c4. So white has already 3 pieces out against black's 1. White has 2 pieces out to black's 1, so I guess he cancels one that is out. Okay. On top of this, white's other pieces can be developed far faster than black's. It's clear that the second player has to be careful. Knight to f6, more prudent would be e6 to try to make this bishop bite on concrete, or a6 to restrict movement of pieces, perhaps playing b5, but I don't know, I really don't know. So, knight f6, now e5, look at that. White offers a second pawn so he can rip open the central lines and gobble up the juicy king threat on e8. So d takes e5, foolishly doing exactly what white wanted him to do. Although knight takes c5, there is knight takes, and after bishop takes f7, and white picks up the queen. If we go back, the best move here for black would have been knight g4, refuses to let white completely rip the position open. So this teaches us that if we have a big lead in development, opening the position may be a good idea in certain circumstances, like when the king is in the center and stuff. So d takes c5, now queen takes d8, surprising because, you know, it changes queens. On the other hand, if you take with the queen, this pawn's lost, and then the pawn structure is terrible. If you take with the knight, this pawn's lost. So knight takes d8 was played, but king takes d8, again a better try. But knight takes d8, and here you don't take the pawn, you play knight b5, threatening the fork to win a full rook. And now king d7, which tries to protect against that, even though rook b8, that will still be a fight, but now 2 pawns are hanging already and it's looking grim. So king d7 looks a little bit more natural, but now knight takes e5 check, and king e8, and knight c7 is actually checkmate. Wow. So that's crazy. So we talked about all of these imbalances, and now something that is similar to lead in development, but is not really lead in development, is initiative, right? And here there is written solve. So this is a problem. So I'm going to treat it like a problem. I don't know if it's intended to be a problem. Perhaps it is, but I'm going to treat it like a problem. Okay, you guys cannot see this, right? Yeah, you cannot see it. So because of laziness, I meant because you guys can see it, I'm going to treat this as a position, a normal position. I'm not going to treat it like a puzzle. So I'm going to just read it. Okay. So let's look at this position. Let's try to analyze it. So 4 pawns, 3 pawns, 4 pawns, 3 pawns. So pawns are equal, 2 bishops, 2 bishops, 2 knights. Okay, so material is equal. Material is equal. What else do we see? pawn structure. Two pawn island, we don't really have weak pawns too much, okay? They don't have weak pawns too much, okay? What else? Open files. The D file's open. Space, I didn't mention space. Perhaps black has slight space advantage, but not really because the e4 pawn. So perhaps we have some slight space advantage on the queen side, but not really in the center. Minor piece activity. The bishop on g2 doesn't look too good. The knight on h4 is a little bit on the side of the board, but can be improved. The knight on c4 looks decently active, and the two dark square bishop cancels each other out. They can be traded, and it feels like this position is about equal, quite frankly. Perhaps though we have slight pull because of the light square bishop being on g2, which is not looking good. And the knight on h4 is also at the moment not very good. But let's see. And also the very slight space advantage. We have some weakness on the light squares though, so we have to be careful about that. So, I consider the initiative to be a physical manifestation of a psychological battle. Both sides champion their view of things in the hope that the opponent will have to eventually forego his own plans and react to yours. Thus, I usually refer to it as pushing your own agenda, presented in part 4, Macho Chess. That chapter I haven't read yet. I only read the first chapter, which is this one, and a part or the full part 2, but not more. So, since that clarifies what the initiative is, and at the same time it tells you how to get it. Okay. So, white has just played knight h4, intending knight g6. And once g6 is covered, an eventual knight f5. Other than this obvious threat, white would like to swing his other knight over to e3. So this knight to e3, okay, and from there to d5, okay. While on the other hand, black would like to take advantage of the somewhat loose knight on c4, okay, and the undefended pawn on a2, okay. Yeah, I noticed that a2 and a5 are a little bit, but yeah, a2, okay. So queen f7. Instead of ending white the initiative, black should answer knight h4 with queen f7. When knight g6 is stopped and c4 is under attack. It defends and pushes black's agenda at the same time. Now the e3 square isn't available for white, but the knight retreat hangs a2. Suddenly, black is the one dictating the direction of the game, and white has to scramble to keep his position together. His choices are all unappetizing. Black can stop the knight g6 threat by king h7, instead of queen f7. But by making a purely defensive move, white gets the opportunity to continue to push his agenda by playing bishop takes c5, and after queen takes c5, let's say, knight e3, After bishop takes c5, if you take with a knight, there's still knight to e3. And after instead queen takes c5, knight e3. And here you may want to go knight b6, right? To fight for the d5 square, as we mentioned. Taking the pawn on a2 in this specific position would not be advised, because after bishop to h3, which attacks the knight, black is suddenly dead, he says. There are problems also on these light squares. You can see bishop f5, knight g6, and it's pretty much tough. So after knight to e3, knight b6, knight to d5 still, and here bishop takes d5. Knight takes d5 would be a blunder, because after bishop takes, bishop takes, bishop takes, rook takes, this is all forced, queen e4 check, picks up the rook. Very nice. So after knight d5, bishop takes d5, e takes d5, again taking leads to that variation. So knight back to e7, which protects the light squares but also attacks d5. But here queen e4 check, king to h8, and now c4. And white has managed to create some interesting complications. If you take, I guess rook c1 is annoying, but I'm not sure. So you cannot just play king h7 or something, you have to play queen f7, which is a very strong move. Now they play b3. What else is there? If they play, instead of b3, if they play bishop takes c5, this time bishop takes c4, intermediate move, just crashes. Instead of b3 or other moves, they can try rook d5, which is an imaginative try to infuse some energy into his position and regain the initiative, because now, of course, if you take, the pawn gets active and all that. b6, which overprotects the bishop. And now white is a little bit in trouble. White was hoping for, obviously, bishop takes, but now e takes, knight e7, knight takes a5, already winning some pawns for it, bishop takes, pawn takes, and after knight takes d5, knight f5, you know, and you have some initiative. But okay. There is also rook takes d7 instead of b3, you know, in the very beginning position. Here there is also, rook takes d7, but this fails. This fails to rook takes d7, and if bishop takes c5, bishop takes c4, and on queen to g4, let's say, bishop takes f1, and on bishop takes f1, rook f to d8 saving the rook, black is 2 exchanges up, whereas if instead of bishop takes f1 you play bishop takes f8, bishop takes g2, and you lose material. So in the game, after queen f7 attacking the knight, b3 is played, or at least the main line of the analysis. Bishop takes c4, look at that. B takes c4. If you take with the queen, you still reach a terrible position of the pawns, but there's no queen, so it's even weaker. But now bishop takes e3. And after f takes e3, because if you take with the queen, you lose a pawn, and then c3 is weak, white is left with an exceptionally ugly pawn formation. Okay, so we play queen f7, they defend, now we can get rid of this guy, and we are gonna have a good position. So, we looked at the initiative, and we are gonna talk about king safety, right? So this isn't a book about attack, but I felt that king safety should be stressed since it's a major factor, which is an imbalance, in many games. In particular, this book will point to an uncastled king as something that should usually be avoided like the plague. In the diagram position, white has sacrificed the pawn, but enjoys a lead in development and a safe king. Black's king, though, is still in the center, and white punishes it before it can get castled. And so in this position here, if we do a quick evaluation, again, we are down a pawn, we have 3 pieces very actively developed, which they are further away, so we don't have a space advantage in the terms of pawns, but our pieces are much further in white's camp. Our queen is strongly positioned, their queen is just in the starting point, and we also have an easier way to develop the other pieces. However, here there is a direct shot, which is knight takes f7. Now, I have studied this position. If we flip the board, this is like a Caro-Kann, if I'm not crazy. It's like a Karpov variation of the Caro-Kann, again, if I'm not crazy. And this is just... I think that black's last move was like knight bd7, which is supposed to be a blunder. And now knight takes f7, just crashing. I could be wrong of what I said, but I think it's correct. King takes f7, of course, that's just, you have to play it. Queen to c7 is, according to the engine, better, but knight takes h8 is just losing a full rook, because then the light scores are also weak, and you're gonna absolutely another bring the knight out, and it's completely winning. So after knight takes f7, king takes f7, but now queen check. If you go back to any of these 3 squares, queen to, well, you cannot go back to g8. So if you go back to any of these 2 squares, queen to f7 is mate. So king g6, but now bishop back to d3, the hunt continues. And notice how this dark square bishop is looking at these dark squares. So there's only really one legal move. You could play knight e4, but you know where this leads. No, there is no knight e4, because it spins, so there's generally just one legal move, my fault. King h5, queen h3, checkmate is a little bit of an unusual move, but everything is controlled, so it's over. Mate, the focus in this book won't be on attacking techniques, but rather on recognizing the dangers of a central king. This will allow you to punish this transgression when it occurs in your game and to avoid falling victim to this illness yourself. So that was very nice. So here you sacrifice the knight. This is very known, very well known. You hit them with the bishop and then you hit them with the queen and it's over. Okay? So how long it has been this recording? Just 45 minutes, not even noticing it. Okay, let's keep going. So we talked about a bunch of stuff, right? And now finally we are talking about static versus dynamics, the battle between short-term and long-term imbalances. These are things that are very tricky, very advanced. If you are confused, that's normal and it's fine. I'm confused myself. So let's read. So let's first evaluate the position very quickly. 3-3-3-3, so pawns are equal, two knights, two bishops. Okay, material is equal. That's the first thing. Space, we have more space in the center. Pawn structure, we have an isolated pawn on d4, okay, which is potential weakness, potential strength. As we know, isolated pawns are complex, so that's my best assessment. When it comes to piece activity, I will say we have a slight pull because of the light square bishops. The light square bishop on c8 sucks. Our bishop on d3 is perhaps the best minor piece on the board. And the bishop on c1 is not bad because again he's already looking at a very good diagonal. So the kings are both safe, however you can easily imagine white regrouping his own pieces to attack black's king. But as the time being is not a big deal. Bishop takes h7 shouldn't work because the g5 square, which is the landing square of the knight in those type of sacrifice, which will be the Greek gift, is firmly controlled by black, so I don't believe in bishop takes h7 at all. At the time being, at least, that is. And black, on the other hand, is blocking the d4 pawn correctly, so the position, I will say, is slightly better for white because of the c8 bishop problem. So perhaps even more than slightly better, but I don't know. And what else? Oh yeah, open files. There is the open C file. There is semi-open D file, semi-open E file. And okay, let's just see what the master says. Statics and dynamics occur in every phase of the game. In general, a dynamic plus is something that needs to be used in a reasonably quick manner, either to score a knockout or to create a long-lasting static advantage of your own. Okay. A static imbalance gives its owner something that will be around for a long time. It can be part of an opening system, thus appearing in the first 10 moves, cause both sides to march to a particular tune in the middle game and still be influencing play right into the endgame. White has an isolated d-pawn. Black views the pawn as a static weakness. Quite a few of his pieces can gang up on it, and the defined d5 square is also a feather in black's cap, d5 square. White views the pawn as a dynamic strength. It gains central space, controls the two important squares on c5 and e5, and allows white, whose extra space makes his piece more active than their black's counterpart, to build up a nasty kingside attack in many lines. Countless world class players have championed both sides of this position. So, yeah, bishop takes h7 definitely doesn't work in that specific line. Position, I should say. Okay. Planning, creating your own future. So this is not an imbalance. This is like the conclusion of the imbalances. This is super important, guys. Pay very strong attention. We are 50 minutes in or something like that. We are all tired. I'm extremely tired. You guys are tired, but it's very, very important you pay attention in this line here, planning, creating your own future, because Silman here talks about exactly what planning is. And if you have ever struggled with planning, like you don't even understand exactly what it means in chess to plan, this is gonna help you clarify. It's not a magic pill. The conclusion is you're gonna have to study a lot, but the way of thinking to formulate a plan is gonna be clarified tremendously, in my opinion. It did it for me, hopefully it does it for you. So let's go. Planning, creating your own future. Okay. In the third edition of How to Reassess Your Chess, I gave a thinking technique that I had personally found useful over the years. I felt it might prove equally useful for higher level amateurs who had been struggling to create logical plans. So this third edition is a previous edition. So he tried this approach, right, in the previous edition of this book. However, the passage of time, which always brings new experience and insight, drastically changed my view about the practicality of any complex system of planning. My change of heart came about when I corresponded with students and lovers of chess from all over the world who were obsessed with finding plans, or were simply trying to grasp what a plan really was, and as a result hadn't fully integrated the imbalances into their plan. By breaking imbalances and plans into two separate things, I had inadvertently caused many hardworking students of the game to lose sight of the one goal I had intended to push: master the imbalances. So I'm gonna give you guys a little spoiler in a way. You have to kinda see it a little bit differently. Anyways, let's keep reading. Though I no longer have faith in convoluted planning systems, I have retained the firm belief that fully understanding the imbalances is 100% attainable for players 1400 and up. Note the word understanding. This book trains you to recognize the imbalances in any board situation, to understand what each imbalance offers, and to know how to make use of it or diffuse it, depending on which side of the imbalance you are sitting on. Once you gain this knowledge and integrate it into your play, you'll find that something surprising happens. The imbalances alone will often tell you what to do, or at the very least give you a firm push in the right direction. Thus, if you possess a dynamic advantage, you will know that your move needs to be dynamic in nature. A quiet positional move most likely won't address the needs of the position. Again, remember, you don't have to do what you feel like doing, you have to do what the imbalances of the position demands. Remember this. So, if your opponent has a glaringly weak pawn on an open file, you will know that at some point you will most likely want to go after it by placing your rooks on that file. If you have a huge advantage in space, you will think twice before trading a bunch of pieces and alleviating some of his cramp. You can call this adherence to the dictates of the imbalances a plan, or simply a logical move or series of moves. The name isn't important. Mastering the imbalances is important and makes all this other stuff possible. So guys, before I keep reading, you should understand that when you were born at some point, like from your mother, you were born, okay? And you were brought into this world, and you learned certain things, and your mind was very open, and then it kind of closed and closed and closed. At some point, you were born as a chess player. Your father taught you chess, or perhaps you saw it on a TV series or whatever, okay? And you were a child when it comes to chess. Even if you were an adult or a young person, you were a child, an infant when it comes to chess. And your mind was very open when it comes to chess, okay? And you learned this concept of planning. You have to plan in chess, right? And then your mind kind of got closer because you became more of an adult when it comes to chess, right? But you need to understand this is wrong. There is no such thing as planning per se. There is understanding the position, evaluating it correctly, see the elements of the position or imbalances, and then from that, logically thinking about the moves coherent with those imbalances. Again, if you see a weak pawn on a semi-open file, the very logical thing to do is to put rooks against it. But to put rooks against the pawn on a semi-open file, that's a plan. But you are not planning. You are identifying there is a weak pawn, and you are finding ways to attack it without hanging your pieces, with doing the right things. But you are planning. But you are never thinking, I wonder what my plan is. No, you're thinking, what are the elements of the position? So you shouldn't look at it as planning, right? You should just look at the position for what it is and do the logical thing, or at least trying your best to do it. So there's no such thing as planning per se. It's like metadata. It's like, let's say you go to see a painting, and there is the painting, and then there is the description, right? You look at the painting. Yeah, you can read the description once, but you're looking at the painting. You don't spend the museum visit looking at the freaking descriptions without even looking at the paintings, right? You look at the paintings. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so the name isn't important. Again, you can call it planning, but again, if you're identifying a weak pawn and you put rooks behind it, yeah, you're planning, but you never think once in your head as a strong chess player while you're playing the word plan. You never do that. Ever. You don't need that. Plan is just a word. Identifying an element and taking decisions about it, that's correct chess. And afterwards you can call it planning, but it's just chess. So, need proof? Go back and look at our first 12 examples. These are illustrations of the imbalances and how to use them, but in every case the imbalance is presented simple, put, effective plans. Remember when we improved the position of the knight, right? We brought the knight to the outpost, but what did we do in that case? We identified there were two minor pieces, one the knight, one the bishop was terrible, the knight also was terrible but had potential, the bishop didn't. And so improve our worst piece just became a plan, but again, you don't think, oh, what's my plan? It's just, okay, I see that they have a terrible bishop, no future. I see we have a terrible knight, potential future. What do? I want to put the knight on the best square. And you're planning, right? So these are illustrations of the imbalances and how to use them. But in every case, the imbalance is presented simple but effective plans. A series of moves, be it 2 or 4 or 8 or more, that logically makes use of your positive imbalances is indeed a plan. Let's take a look at some games where imbalance basics and impressive plans join together as one. In a nutshell, the imbalances alone will lead you to the right move or right moves in most positions, or even help you create a detailed plan, which again is like the same thing in a way. So that's it. So hopefully that clarified a lot. I feel like this is really a breakthrough in thinking. To me, it was a breakthrough when I went over this chapter here. I think this chapter here is one of the most important chess content that I ever read. Like this here, imbalances, learning the ABC, and planning, creating your own future. I think those are just huge, huge. Now, I'm not gonna keep going. I'm gonna stop the video here. On the next episode, we are going to go through Topolov's Sarasikiran exercise, which I'm going to treat like a puzzle this time, because even though there's learn and not solve, this is an exercise. And then there's going to be the explanation. Then there's going to be Nigel Short against Jan Timman. And then there's going to be a thought exercise, right? We are going to pretend there are 3 players with 3 different styles having a game, 2 against 1. And we are going to see what their thinking process can teach to us. And then there's going to be another game, and then there's going to be another example, and then the summary of everything. But we are going to do this in episode 3. For today, guys, is everything. Let me go here so that I can close the video. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. Hopefully you got a lot of good teachings from this episode. I definitely did. Thanks so much again. Enjoy your chess.